Welcome to the Steelworkers Hall at 33 Cecil Street. My name is Nancy Pridham and I'm the Vice President of the Ontario Public Service Executive Union Board in Region 5. This is a really exciting opportunity tonight and I want to thank a number of people. First of all, I want to thank the Greater Toronto Area Council and their partnership and their endorsement and their work on this event in getting speakers and in securing the hall. And I'd certainly like to say thanks to the community folks I see here this evening and to everyone who is a participant from a labor organization as well. So welcome. I wonder if any of you know why this forum came about or what our thoughts were around having this activity. And I think if you need to ask that question, I might remind you that we're just a few short days away from probably something that is of huge importance, monumental importance to not only working people, but I would say the general public in the province of Ontario. Or it should be of some importance. And I guess that is the impetus for hosting this forum this evening and for asking people to come and speak this evening. I work at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. That's my job. I'm a registered practical nurse. And I also am on the board for the Ontario Public Service Employees Union as well. It's like having two full-time jobs, believe you me. As a public sector worker over the years, I've noticed the changes to the healthcare system, and I've noticed that people are losing their jobs and people are in fact getting laid off in the healthcare system, in case any of you weren't aware of that. And that's because the McGuinty government has held us to this accountability plan or this accountability clause for hospitals. So we have no choice but to show a balanced budget. And the employer says to show a balanced budget, well, that means we have to cut programs, and inevitably that means cutting jobs, cutting services. It's a very familiar tune to me. And within my organization, OPSEU, and certainly in the OPS, in the last budget, there were massive job cuts announced. Significant impact to workplaces, significant impact to services that will be delivered to members of the public. So that's you, members of the public. Those services will be diminished. And then I think about the college strike that just happened, the college support workers that were just on strike for 18 days. They took on a government against a two-tier system, which would see differences between people currently working in the system and people coming into the system. People would wonder why people coming into the system, which is often students, why they would pay, why they would hoist the burden for decisions that governments have made. And then you think sort of overall at what we're all facing, and I think even if you didn't watch TV, if you couldn't even stand to open the newspaper, I know that people are mumbling all around you about the absolutely incredible austerity measures that are taking place across the globe. Everywhere, working people are being told that they have to somehow help out in this situation. So I opened up the paper this morning and I laugh a little bit. I see that Tony Clement is apparently hiding away from his $50 million G8 boondoggle, right? They got $50 million to spend on that event. Make a good display of themselves, and we all know what happened at the G8, the G20. We don't have to go through that. But you think about that government, that majority government, and you think about the cuts that they've made to social programs, the cuts they've made that have an impact on families, that have an impact on women, that have an impact on children. Not just here, but in other countries. So, you know, you can see that, well, we've cut our funding, and then the austerity measures are, and what kind of an impact that has all the way around. And then you think about the Liberal government, because it's really the Liberals that have the most impact, certainly on public sector workers, certainly. And you know, the notion that Dalton wants to, you know, $2.4 billion in tax cuts. And that means that working people should take 0 and 0, should see no increase in a wage, should see no change in their pensions, should see no change in their benefits, should not contribute to a robust economy. Because if working people, people who are in the labor movement, traditionally have those good jobs, I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for that because that means that we're able to set the bar, and that people who aren't in unionized jobs have something to strive for, or we can help them get something. And that we know that the private sector has indeed benefited from unions and benefited from the labor movement and benefited from the gains that working people have made because they're paying themselves an awful lot of money. We know that. And that is because of us. And then we look at the municipal situation that we're in Toronto, and it's mind-boggling. You know, the boat full of gravy, and Rob was going to tip it over, and all the fat was going to go one way, and all the lean was going to go the other, I guess. I think about in my mom's traditional gravy bowl, that's what happens. The fat rises to the top. Good old British cook, right? The fat rises to the top, and you can skim it off. And that, you know, you think about that. That's what my vision was, ha-ha. And there isn't any. And so now we're playing this eeny, meeny, miny, mo game of what service are we going to cut? And you know, the choice is you can put up your hand and vote for that, or you can't. So it's a bit, you know, sad out there, and it's a bit of a bad situation, but I believe that we actually have an opportunity to make some change. And if you don't believe that, I'm going to suggest to you that after listening to all these folks here tonight, that you will believe that you can, not only can make a change, but that you should be making a change come October 6th, 2011. I believe that we have a chance to change our fate, change who we're doing business with, and do business with someone who actually might listen to working people, because I believe that there is a government out there that will support, there is a group of people out there that will support working people, that will support good communities, strong communities. And I know who I'll be supporting on October the 6th, 2011. And that certainly will be the New Democrat in my riding, Michael Proulx. And I encourage all of you to get out and support the NDP government on October 6th and to really participate in this election. It's really important. So we need to begin to develop new strategies. We hope that tonight is the beginning of something, not a one-time event. We would like to do this again in the future because it doesn't just stop on October 6th. It must continue on. We must be able to work together to build networks on the ground floor at the grassroots level. We know it isn't working for everybody all over the place. But I think if we start to share our ideas and we start to work together, we will be able to make change. So we're pleased to be able to sponsor this forum this evening. Our panelists this evening have all been incredible activists in their own right and have been pushing the envelope and pushing forward on the fight to defend good jobs and quality public services everywhere. John Cartwright is the president of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council. Dina Ladd is a community organizer and activist coordinator of the Workers' Action Centre. Sandy Hudson is the chair of the Canadian Federation of the Students of Ontario. Carolyn Egan is the president of the Steelworkers Toronto Area Council, and she's also a board member with Labour Council and co-chair of the Good Green Jobs for All Coalition. Alan Sears is a professor of sociology at Ryerson University and a member of the coordinating committee of the Greater Toronto Workers' Assembly. And finally, we are particularly lucky to have Kathy Crow join our panel this evening. Kathy is a street nurse, an author and longtime activist and leader in the fight against poverty and homelessness. Kathy is also the NDP's candidate and the next member of the provincial parliament for the riding of Toronto Centre. So finally, and without further ado, John Cartwright. Thank you, by the way, for your endorsement of this event this evening.
Thanks, Nancy. Good evening, sisters and brothers.
Good evening.
So Nancy outlined, I think some of the really important elements for us to keep in mind in this conversation. And the first one is that when we think back to a year and a half ago when Stephen Harper invited the world leaders to come to the convention center and talk about an austerity agenda and get their agreement to impose an austerity agenda, that is clearly the framework that we're all working under and have been ever since. And Harper has embraced that, and now that he's got a majority government, firing 800 workers at the Minister of Environment, because of course he doesn't want them to get in the way of the tar sands developments, putting many, many other federal public sector workers on notice, stripping the right to strike away from postal workers, but even stripping the right to strike away from private sector employees, Air Canada, in this summer. So he's clearly set the stage of where he wants to go. Nancy's mentioned how the provincial government has also embraced a kinder, gentler version of the austerity agenda. In the way, in fact, I heard Dalton McGuinty boasting last night of how, or I should say this morning, of how they're reducing thousands of public servants in the province of Ontario, and they're partway there and they've got more to accomplish, in his phrasing. Our Labour Council, back about 2 years ago, developed a whole campaign on Stop the Corporate Tax Cuts because we understood clearly that what the attempt of neoliberalism is to starve the public service so that there would be an excuse to cut it, privatize it, and sell off assets. And a big part of that starvation diet was $14 billion in cuts at the federal level, reducing corporate tax levels, and $2.4 billion at the local level. But I'm here mostly to talk about the connection with the fight at city level. And I want to thank everybody that came out to City Hall. Was it just yesterday?
No, Monday.
Monday, okay. For that great party, we had a lot of fun. I think people expressed themselves, the kind of folks that were speaking from the stage really reflected the full diversity of our city, and those who are going to be impacted by Ford's austerity agenda, whether they're frontline delivery workers or people in the communities and neighborhoods that are going to be impacted. And our strategy in the Labour Council, since the start of the year, dealing with Rob Ford, has been very simple. We wanted to try and slow down his ability to drive that austerity agenda. And secondly, we wanted to erode his credibility so that he could not use his coattails to elect a number of Conservatives in the provincial election, to get the same 8 seats for the Tories on October 6th that they were able to get federally in May, because if they did that, Tim Hudak would become Premier. And so we felt it was a serious obligation to send a message out through our members, public and private sector, construction, hotel workers, retail, healthcare workers, everybody you could imagine, that Rob Ford is taking the city in the wrong direction. And the things he's doing will hurt communities and will hurt workers. And right now I'm undertaking a whole series of presentations to local unions all across Toronto from every sector. And in fact, I have to leave here a little early because I've got to go and speak to a construction union up at Downmills and Eglinton in a little while, to connect the dots between the austerity agenda, Stephen Harper, Rob Ford, and Tim Hudak. And I think it's important to remind people that the Tories did say, when they were last in office provincially, that they wanted to not just create a crisis. The actual words that John Snowden, their Minister of Education, used, because I went and looked at it on YouTube about a week ago, invent a crisis in education so that they could solve it on their terms. And clearly what's happening with the Conservative Party Mayor, Conservative Party Deputy Mayor Holiday, the Conservative Party Budget Chief Mike Del Grande, is that they have decided to invent a financial crisis at the City of Toronto saying there's 774 deficit and therefore the slash and burn agenda must be applied. Bizarre, given that they inherited a $250 million surplus, and then they squandered that, they walked away from $100 million in income, they drained all the reserves, and now they've got themselves a crisis. But it's important for us to draw that comparison to the last time the Tories were in office provincially and the Ford agenda, and I think the unraveling in the last 2 days of his ability to move through City Hall was clearly a reflection of the popular resistance to that austerity agenda on the ground, and that's what we've got to continue to build on. So, moving into this provincial election, reminding people that we've seen this movie before and it ends badly, but also reminding people that it's not just good enough to say stop Hudak. We need champions, some would actually say warriors, in this class war that's being laid out by the elites of this country and this world. And that calls for a kind of commitment to a clear social justice agenda that just doesn't go with the flow and just doesn't try and adapt to the new realities of neoliberalism, the new realities of global cowboy capitalism. And so I think it's important as we go into our workplaces and our communities that we connect those conversations, that we talk about what do we want in terms of the political voice for working people. Who does that look like? Where do we find those champions and how do we make sure they get elected? And I'll end by saying it's wonderful to be standing beside somebody who's proven herself a champion for working people and the poor and those who are most in need in this city year after year, and that's Cathy Crowe.